Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm super excited to be joined by Karinne and Sander Berkouwer. We're going to be talking about how things have changed. Before we get started, let's do some quick introductions. I'm the CEO, technical founder of ENow Software, been an admin for years, now help solve problems for admins so that you guys can relax. Sander, why don't you give a little background on yourself just briefly?
Yep. So I'm the CTO at Dirtium and the CTO at SCCT. And I've also been a Microsoft MVP for the last 14 years and a Veeam Vanguard for the last 7 years.
I'm a technologist here at Veeam Software. I am the subject matter expert when it comes to Microsoft 365 services and specialize in our backup software suite on that side. And this is my cat. She tends to steal the thunder when it comes to the cute and adorableness on the camera.
Thank you both for joining us. So to kick things off, I have a question. How do you guys feel IT's changed in the last 4 years with the adoption of cloud technologies? That's a very broad question, but what comes to mind when you think about that?
So when I think about that, I usually just look at my head and, I used to have more hair 3 years ago. And this is the effect of the last 3 years. It's been a roller coaster ride, really. And we've seen organizations adopt Microsoft 365 at an astonishing rate, but not necessarily the right way.
Fair.
So I might have a little bit more hair, but I do have a little bit of experience. I noticed some trends that happened. There's a huge breakdown that we had in the supply chain. So the supply chain forced us to do an adoption that was maybe 5 to 7 years out, pretty much overnight. No one was deploying in the data center. And we've now had this kind of shift back and forth to becoming this truly hybrid and multi-cloud scenarios. And it's been really interesting to see how we've went really fast. Now we're trying to secure really hard, and now we're pulling back really quickly in between. And I think that's what we're going to be doing a lot of talking about, how we monitor those environments and the transitions and how to make sure the uptime is optimal in between those.
Yeah, I think a lot about the change that we went through, some of it with the pandemic. With the pandemic, we saw a lot of bureaucracy and walls fall down. Sometimes you go to do a technical project and you know how to do it technically, but then the business gets in the way. No, I'm kidding about that. But there's process and people that sometimes slow down migrations. You look at what happened with Teams overnight when we had to work from home, all the walls fell down. Teams adoption went through the roof. And that created other challenges, right? Because when you go that fast, you don't want to go so fast that you don't have time to put in governance and other components. It creates other challenges. The other thing that I often think about, back to my days when I was managing on-prem technologies, we would wait to Service Pack 1, we would have the choice to deploy something, and now it feels like we're on this roller coaster ride where Microsoft is innovating at such an impressive pace. The challenge is when they're rolling out these features, 400 or 500 features a year for Teams, how are we able to support those users? How do we learn, teach people about those features? How do we secure it? How do we monitor it? How do we back it up? There's a whole host of new challenges. So for the IT professional, the one thing that stayed constant is there's always been change. And I think that's what draws IT professionals to this career path, is because it's always exciting, it's always new. We just went to the fast path, warp speed with cloud technology. So I think it's just a different paradigm. Let's talk about myths. Because there's a lot of change, naturally, there's going to be myths. What do you guys think about myths that you guys have seen and heard about? Let's give the audience a sneak peek about what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so I totally agree with what you're saying, is that we started running before we could even walk. And I think all these myths are great examples of that. And then just looking at licensing and just looking at partner collaboration, things like that, it has changed dramatically. And most organizations don't even know that they do. I know we talked about that, Jay, a while ago, that there's still organizations that say, yeah, we love Microsoft 365, we don't have Azure AD. It's like, what? But yeah, it's running instead of walking, instead of crawling. Yep.
Oh, absolutely.
So the myth that I've been dealing with for quite a while now has been around the concept of Microsoft has everything protected once you move up to the cloud, and it's a huge conversation, and there's a lot of evidence out there, but you think I'm letting go of my responsibility. I'm giving that away. That's what I'm paying for. No, you're paying for software, you're paying for services, you're paying for infrastructure. You're not paying for the protection of your data through the front door. And that's what we'll be really digging into, and a little bit of that shared responsibility model come through.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of discussion around how 365 is being positioned. In the old days, and I'm not that old, even though I'm bringing up on-prem software, and I do have a lot of gray hair. It's probably from running my business. When you look at an upgrade, for example, in the on-prem world, very rarely did executives care about the upgrade as long as it was seamless. They didn't care what version of Exchange you're on, what version of AD. It never reached the executives. But with 365, first of all, Microsoft did a remarkable job with delivering that service. And when you look at how companies used to deploy Link, Exchange, SharePoint, due to politics, due to technology, it very rarely was seamlessly integrated. So 365 offers this incredible user experience. But when they go to executives and say, hey, we need to go to the cloud, and executives get involved and, hey, we need to move to 365, sometimes unrealistic expectations get set. And I think that's part of the challenge. Hey, this is going to be super easy, but everything now is being questioned. How do you administer it? How do you govern it? How do you support users? Do you need backup? Do you need AV? Do you need monitoring? There's a lot of questions, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Sandra, your eyes are perking up. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I heard you say monitoring, but isn't that what your company does? Isn't that how ENow software could help?
100%. Let's dive into that first myth here. Give me 1 second to change the slides. Let's talk about monitoring. Since you brought that up, Sandra, what's your opinion on monitoring?
Well, I see organizations being confronted with outages, and they're in the news. They're on the main news websites, and most of them hear about those outages through main websites now, instead of from their, the Exchange admin. And of course, Exchange admins know that they're going to lose their job if Exchange is down for 3 days. But is a Microsoft 365 manager or architect going to lose its job if it's out for 3 months or 3 weeks or 3 days? And how would they know? And how would that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a completely different paradigm. I would say Microsoft does a great job of keeping the service up and running as a whole. Global outages are far and few between, but very similar to a rainstorm. I'll tell you something really funny. In the news just recently, if you're in the United States, you heard about these crazy rainstorms that were supposed to hit California. And my mom called me up the next day and said, hey, are you okay? And I cracked up because the day before I texted my wife, she was out picking up the kids, and I said, be careful during this crazy storm, we got a drizzle. And people in my neighborhood were posting on Facebook laughing, like a little picture of a potted plant tipped over saying, oh my goodness, the storm destroyed everything. And then someone commented that was literally 2 miles down the road and said, wait a minute, look at this picture of a tree that was completely split. And I think that epitomizes what it's like in the cloud. Right down the road, someone could be suffering an outage. If you have a global deployment, it might be one particular office, it might be one component. So I think that's part of the challenge is, number one, things are a little bit more complex than they seem. If you're talking about a hybrid infrastructure, you have your network, you have Microsoft's network, you have hybrid components. So when there is an outage, how do you determine, first of all, is it a Microsoft problem or is it a me problem? And if you guessed wrong, you could be in a world of hurt. Because if you wait for Microsoft to fix something that's on your network, that presents a challenge. So monitoring itself is a completely new paradigm. I'm also seeing a big shift from looking at servers. In the old days, you'd monitor servers, things that you were responsible for, to monitoring the service and ultimately monitoring the end user. And so those are things that we look at. We've been in the monitoring space for unbelievably 18 years. And we've been monitoring 365 since 2012 when it first came out. We were monitoring VPOS before. But our goal as a former admin is we want to make it easy for the IT professional to do their job and not be stressed. Because I think another comment I hear a lot, and I know I personally experienced this, is that in some organizations, being in IT is a thankless job. And you only hear from people when things are broken versus, hey, you're doing a great job keeping things up and running. Of course, 365, there's a definite shift because our jobs are changing to educating users, teaching them, but some of that mentality still exists.
So how, Jay, how would you answer the question, am I going mad or is Microsoft?
Let me show you how we do that just briefly. And Karinne, you had a comment there?
I was just going to say, I worked in support for our company for many years, and we work on a platform that backs up from the 365 environment to on-premises types of environments. And every time there's a slowdown or something is not going as quickly, or they're doing migrates on their side, they don't notify the customers. They don't know what's going on from those on-premises. And I know you guys do deployments of different applications, so you can see what the on-premises speed to the cloud deployment is, and those are pieces of information that Microsoft doesn't just give out on a regular basis, and would have been very helpful when I was back in my support days to point out, yeah, it's not really a you issue or an us issue, it's the service SLA that you pay for. It's still working, it's just not as fast today.
Yeah, that's another example of just how things are different. Can you see my screen, by the way, okay? I just got a little
Yes.
message here. As you guys know, I'm not a big GoToMeeting user. Good platform. It's a user issue. I'll take that joke. I think for most IT organizations in the on-prem world, they prided themselves on keeping things up and running and being proactive. And never did you want the end users to notify you that you had an outage. So the question then becomes, how do you do that in a cloud world? How do you know if there's an outage, and how do you notify the users ahead of time? And I think that's a real big challenge, because although Microsoft provides native tools, for example, they provide the Service Health Dashboard, but sometimes, a lot of times when there's an outage, you can't access it. A lot of times it's out of date. So if you take the dynamic of management saying, we're going to go to 365 and it's super easy. I had one VP, an SVP of a large financial organization come to me completely frustrated, saying, hey, the CEO said we can migrate 200,000 plus users to 365 by the end of the year. What am I going to do with compliance? How am I going to get this done? So there's this expectation that it's easy. Then there's no tools, there's no visibility. So how do you be proactive? So that's one of the questions that we like to answer, and we help you answer. That central question, is it a Microsoft problem or is it a me problem? How we do that, just briefly, you make sure that I'm not going overtime here. We provide a single pane of glass where you can see your on-prem components, your hybrid components, and 365. And this single pane of glass is often used by the network operations team. It's customizable. It can be used by the backend Teams team, SharePoint team, Exchange team. I'm still working on the Teams team part. That's a little tricky. But it's customizable, and we're trying to solve the problem of giving you visibility. We're not trying to. We absolutely give you visibility. So one thing you'll notice here is that depending upon the technology, the layout's different. So for on-prem Exchange, you have a completely different. For on-prem AD, different layout, and for 365, you have a different layout. For 365, when it comes to outages, they really fall into a couple different categories. Number one, you can have a challenge with your network. And so what we do for network monitoring is we give you the ability to drill down in, and you can pick a workload. And one thing I forgot to mention here is we're using a stoplight system, something very universal. Green is good, yellow's warning, red is critical. You don't need to be sitting in front of this dashboard. It does integrate into ServiceNow, integrates into sending out email alerts. But the idea is to give you a quick glance. Is everything okay? Or do I have a problem? And then if I do have a problem, where is that problem? Is it something I need to take care of? And how can I best support my users? So when I drill down into the network section, I can look, for example, at the Exchange Online workload. And when I drill into the Exchange Online workload, I can see the different endpoints. I can see if, especially if you're going through a migration, did the network team open that? Can I knock on Microsoft's front door? And not only can I knock on Microsoft's front door, but how is the network performing? Now, we're not a networking tool, but if you're responsible for Office 365, you're going to want to know if there's a blip in the service or if there's a disruption. So being able to quickly give you that visibility on the network side. We also have the ability to install remote probes at branch offices or on workstations. So then you can see, for example, if the London light is only going off, that's probably indicative that you only have a network problem in London, or maybe some other part of the world, maybe like South Africa, where the network connectivity is not as good. You'd be able to see I have a network issue. Going across from left to right, you can also drill into hybrid components. So for example, with authentication, which I know, Sandra, you're a big fan of directory services. I can come into my Azure AD Connect server. I can see if the Azure AD Connect server is running okay. I can actually drill down and see, is the actual sync service working? So we modify an attribute on-prem. We go up to Azure AD and verify, did that attribute change? We give you a single pane of glass that if you ever have to troubleshoot Azure AD Connect, I don't view Azure AD Connect as mission critical. If it breaks, most people don't know. But when you find out, usually there's a problem because the directories get out of sync. So you want to be proactive here. We can tell you and show you how's the directory service performing. For those that still utilize ADFS, we can test and actually do a full single sign-on and pass a SAML token back and forth. So when you combine this test with our remote probes, you can now test if authentication is working outside your organization, inside your organization, again, giving you visibility. For the workloads, what we do, we take a similar approach that we do with Azure AD Connect in that we use a lot of synthetic transactions. So for example, for the Exchange Online workload, I can test things that a user would do on a regular basis. Can I send an email? Can I send an email with an attachment with high importance? Can I look up free busy information? Can I schedule a meeting? So these tests are continuously running. And where it really comes in handy is, for example, in late November and December, there was a SharePoint outage. And I was, at the time, I had global admin rights. And I have since they've taken that away from me because of all the SOC 2, all the different certifications we're going through. So that's probably a good thing. I was given a link and I clicked on the link and I couldn't access the file. Because I had global admin, I went backdoor, got the file, didn't think anything of it. I was talking to one of my customers and they're like, man, we were affected by a SharePoint Online outage. And I was like, really, what was the outage? So we found out that they were only affected by a specific component. So what we did in our software is we've given us the ability now to get very granular and actually mimic every action, almost every action a user can take. So the point here is that you need synthetic transactions. Our software goes out and takes a look at those, look at how a user actually uses the service, and then gives you the ability to kind of dive into it. Two other quick things I want to show you. We also have an integrated service health dashboard that utilizes Microsoft's API. And the cool thing about this dashboard is when there's an outage due to token caching, our dashboard is going to be available. So you can click on this without logging into the admin console, see that there's an issue that's actually happening right now. The service is degraded. You can see updates. You can scroll down, see incidences, past advisories, and something really cool that came from some of our end users in our community. They told us that they depend upon Twitter to see if there's an issue. So you can see here, if a lot of people are commenting on an issue, having a single pane of glass where you can see, is Microsoft having a problem? Am I having a problem with the network? You have visibility. The last thing I want to show you is around Teams, because Teams is super challenging. I would say with Teams, more than often, the problem is on the customer side. What we do is, I know Microsoft provides the call quality dashboard. If you come into the call quality dashboard, it is a little overwhelming in terms of the data that it provides. And sometimes management just wants to know, how is Teams performing for the organization? So we provide a simplified Teams call quality dashboard where you can come in here and see how, against the key KPIs, does someone sound like a robot or calls being disconnected? You can see them here on the screen. You can quickly see, how is Teams performing against the CQD data that I have over the last month, week, or day? And then something really cool, you can see how users perceive their calls, because we aggregate the rate my call feature here, and you can take a look. Another thing that we've just recently announced is we've announced VIP monitoring. So if you have those executives that are working from Costa Rica or in some crazy location and they're complaining about call quality, you can put them in a bucket, and then you can drill into them and actually see if you look here, here's some of my 4 calls, and what you'll notice is that over 70% of my calls are on Wi-Fi or on my mobile device. 66% to be exact of all the bad calls I have are because I'm talking on my iPhone. You can see the number of 4 calls and then who am I speaking to the most. You actually can see the data of the calls and the meetings. So we're giving you the ability to be able to troubleshoot on the fly, monitor executives, and then we also provide this for the help desk. So help desk can come in here and pick any user and do the same type of troubleshooting. We have some cool things like adding ISP, location information. So as you can see, there's a lot here in which we're trying to give you visibility into. And I think that's the goal. The goal is for us to make it easier for you as an admin to be able to support the technology and be able to have that visibility so that when there is an outage and people are calling in the help desk, you're able to be proactive and say, you know what, no, Microsoft's having a problem. The service is going to be up in a few hours. Or, you know what, we have a problem. Let's go route it to the networking team. Let's go route it to the appropriate team. But that's a little bit, Sander, of how we tackle that problem.
Well, yeah, it certainly makes it easier. If only there was a way to make Microsoft licenses easier, right? It's like,
yeah. So now you're getting into the second that this is a fascinating problem. So the one thing that we really pride ourselves on, and this is really my passion. My passion is solving problems. And we talked about at the beginning, on the onset of this call, how things are changing. If someone had ever told me we were going to get into how Microsoft licenses and help IT admins, I would have looked at them cross-eyed and said, "You're crazy. Why would IT professionals be having to? Why would they deal with licensing?" So let's talk a little bit about licensing, since you brought that up, Sander. What are you seeing with licensing, and where does that bleed come in with IT?
A slight pause before we go into that. Since we are at the third of the way through, I want to point out to our audience, it is important that we get questions. If you have any burning questions, definitely start typing in. We will get to anything that you have as we're going through towards the end of the webinar, but start thinking as we're talking and just put them into the chat and we'll get to them for you.
Thank you for that reminder.
yeah, if we don't get any questions, we'll just ramble on, and nobody likes that.
No.
Now, what we're seeing with Microsoft
Yeah.
365 is that 3 years ago, 5 years ago, no organization was actively, well, not every organization was actively working on incorporating collaboration with partner organizations. And these days, either through ADFS or Azure AD, but always with federation components and protocols in mind, they are actively working together with partner organizations, and they're actively providing services to consumers. Even I'm now working with an organization that creates really fun equipment to do your house heating more efficiently. You know, I'm in Europe, so we have really dynamic prices for energy these days. And what we're seeing is that is a whole other ball game for IT pros to understand, and it goes way beyond the management principles that they had on-prem, where we would just have one big firewall and that would be it. We're now having to open up our network and have really granular security settings. And well, to be fair, the default security settings in Microsoft 365 aren't that great if you're not into collaboration, because guest accounts and Azure AD business to business is on by default. People in your organization can invite people over to work with them. If there's a conditional access policy that applies to all users that requires multi-factor authentication, you have a bunch of users, you have a bunch of guests, then yeah, that could bring you, well, if you have more than 5,000 guests per month, obviously, that would begin to cost you money, because that's the model that Microsoft now has for that guest access. And of course, it's not just about the premium functionality. If we're talking about users being able to just pick apps from the Office store, or just use trial services, or even claim licenses, all those settings are on by default. And in some organizations, I encounter really big messes in terms of licenses.
Yeah, I think the challenge was, how do we get to the cloud? And then when the pandemic, even before the pandemic, everyone knew this was the direction that modern organizations were going to move to. Then the pandemic happened, and then it was, oh boy, we need to get there yesterday because everyone is working from home. And through this whole time period until recently, Microsoft did something very nice. They didn't really raise their prices, and then they innovate. We're a software company. We innovate. Innovation is hard. Innovation is expensive. So they raised their price. So what happened from our perspective in talking to clients is the way they approach an EA now is very different than how they approached an EA in the past. And so what we're seeing happen, and the stories I'm hearing, is IT is being really pulled into this. So it may have been in the past, hey, we think we need to have some visibility. Now it's, oh my goodness, if this is affecting our P&L, we really need to understand how our users are utilizing Microsoft services. And because the native tools are limited, this is causing a lot of pain. And from the people I've spoken to, they're spending 40, 80 hours. They're trying to go into Power BI. They're trying to make their own little scripts to handle this. And some of the challenges that we're seeing is, how do you identify overlapping licenses? If you switch from the old E model to the E3 versus the old E365 E3, what services does that include? So as Microsoft continues to innovate and rename things, it becomes a full-time job just trying to keep up with what SKU has what package, combined with do we assign the right licenses? Do we have duplicate licenses? Do we have inactive licenses? How do we forecast? It's becoming really, really challenging. So when our customers came to us and said, we have this challenge, we said, you know what? We're going to listen to you. Our job is to provide value. So we created a suite of reports that I can show you right now, and I'll show you just a few of them, just to kind of give you the flavor. So if this is something, and you're listening to this and you haven't been drug into this yet, maybe it's because your EA hasn't come up. It's probably something you do want to get ahead of. We recommend getting ahead of it maybe 6 months. So just briefly, let me just show you.
So we've thrown out a lot of acronyms, and I know I am terrible with acronyms because I work in IT and a whole bunch of business fields as well. If you could spell those out for me, just for my benefit.
No problem. So
Yeah.
B2B, that's one spelled out. No, it's business to business collaboration.
Thank you.
Then Jay was talking about an EA, that's an enterprise agreement that large organizations use. And of course, there's the E3, and nobody still knows what the E stands for. But we did have an Office 365 E3 with just Office stuff. And now we have a Microsoft 365 E3 with both Office and Intune and Azure AD and even Windows stuff in it.
And the M license actually came with Windows license and Defender, right?
Yes.
When they were working with them.
Yeah. So Microsoft 365 E3 now has Defender Plan 1, and there's an E5 license as well that has Defender Plan 2. And I think we've heard, I don't know if they're jokes or rumors, but there's been rumors of an E7 license for years already and Plan 3 licenses for years already. But that would make it even more interesting.
I will tell you from my experience, depending upon what client I speak to and how large they are, there's all sorts of different license types. Government has their own SKUs, EDU has their own SKUs, large customers have their own special deals, just like I'm sure Microsoft's being very flexible with them. So yeah, there's a lot of acronyms. Thank you for pointing that out. And again, this is why this is
such a... And they also have education license. So there's the G license and there's the A license. A license are for your education plans, which comes with more education tools. And the G license have the similar tools as your E license sets, but they actually come with all of the security features with the G1 license instead of getting those later in the license suite, because the government requires those security features earlier in the license suites in order to purchase them to begin with. I actually had to do a thing with my company. They wanted to be like, what benefits come from these earlier license, and they're like, could you give us just to tomorrow? And I'm like, I need 2 weeks. And it ended up being 3.5 weeks later. I gave them a presentation of several slides later for 45 minutes of how licenses are done. And if you ever do have to get with Microsoft on license, I recommend talking to at least 3 different people at Microsoft, different people at Microsoft, and then getting an average of how you're going to purchase those licenses. But yes, they do change, and they have been getting a little better, but they are different depending on what sector you're in. And we got an excellent question, which is really pertinent, about the CSP versus the EA. And I'm pretty sure that's the number of people you have in your organization is going to determine if you're going to do the customer service plans. That's what that means, right? Versus the enterprise plans is under 500 or above 500, to clarify. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
largely
and within
after EAs. Go ahead, Sandra. Sorry.
yeah, and with an EA you get support from Microsoft, and with a CSP you get support from the partner that sells you the licenses, or actually resells you the license. And there's multiple tiers of CSPs as well. So there's large account resellers there in between as well. Is this the right time to talk about business basic and business premium licenses, or are we just going to go through reports?
Let's not go too deep.
So to clarify, we are not Microsoft's licensed salespeople, but we've gone through enough headaches to at least get there. But Jay's going to show you some of his software and how we can save, or he can help your company save some money on deduplication of those service overlaps, because there are portions of license that you can buy that give you enhancements to the license you already have, but you may already have those features.
Yeah, and there's really two things. I would say let's start with who wakes up in the morning and says, I want to deal with licensing. If you're an IT professional, it's about tinkering with things, configuring, not dealing with licensing. And yeah, it is fun to go into Power BI and try to solve some of these problems, but it's not what we want to do. It's not so much, we absolutely saved money. We saved, one client recently called me a few weeks ago and said we saved them 10% on their EA. So it is substantial. If you like the monitoring, which most IT folks like, the visibility, when it goes up,
Enterprise agreement, right?
Enterprise agreement, yes.
Okay.
Sorry. I use acronyms too much. If you like the monitoring, what pays for the solution is the license optimization module. And there's two things that we do. Number one, we save you time. We save you the headache of having to deal with this, having to keep up with Microsoft's changes, and then trying to figure out what you own, duplicate licenses, forecasting, that whole tub of tasks. And then, of course, we also save you money. So I'm going to show you just three or four reports just briefly. This first report here, let me just move my screen around. This first report is called Licensed Users. And what it enables you to do is very quickly see, what do we own? That sounds like a simple problem, but if you use the native tools, that is not an easy question to answer. It helps you identify duplicate licenses, and it also helps you see who has the same license type. So what you can do is you can see total spend down here. I can drag and drop the license here. I can now scroll down and I can see, for example, who has the E3, who's assigned it. And I can go down, such forth, CE5, see the different bundles that I have. Again, it looks very simplistic, but if you try to go get this information on your own, it is not easy. The second report that I like to highlight is called Over Licensed Users. Now, what this report does a great job of is showing, where do I have license overlap? And so you can come in here and quickly see, if I have overlap on licenses, what is the license to keep? What our clients have been doing is using manual spreadsheets to go try to figure this information out. Not only does it show you the overlap, it also shows you the potential monthly savings, the yearly savings, and then which users to go target. So again, very simplistic, but saving you hours of work. The license cost report, what this shows you is who's not using their license. So this report can actually be used to track adoption. It can be used by asset managers to reduce cost. You can see your monthly run rate, and then you can identify licenses that aren't in use. So if you look at this report, you can come in here, for example, if you wanted to drill into just Power BI, you could look at Power BI and then be able to see, well, who's using Power BI? So first of all, how much am I paying? How many licenses do I have? What's the total annual cost? How many people are assigned? You can drill into that to see who's assigned, the assigned cost, and more importantly, what if I have an example of somebody who needs a Power BI license and you find out that you don't have Power BI licenses available? So the normal thing that most people do is go up and buy a new Power BI license. What this report enables you to do is actually drill down into the inactive list, see who hasn't used that software in 90 days. And now what you're able to do is go talk to that person and then provision, or actually re-provision that license and save you money. So really this report has multiple uses, but it's a great snapshot on, again, cost savings. The last report that I want to show is what we call the candidates for license optimization. Now, this report is extremely complex, but also very powerful. What it does is it analyzes each user in your organization. It shows what their current license is. It shows what we recommend that they can downgrade to and why. It shows you the potential license cost, the potential monthly savings, and the potential annual savings. So what we do is we actually read the Microsoft contract and we look at what constitutes why someone would need a higher grade license, and then we can come back and make a recommendation. We also have the ability to give you particular premium features that you might want without necessarily going to an E5. You can put in those features. The software then would recommend, okay, the best way to get that is use X bundle. And then another thing that we are adding here in about 2 weeks is we're giving you the ability to toggle this on and off. So if you're in the day-to-day management of licenses, you're going to want to see how does this information compare to what I have available to me versus if you're in an EA negotiation, how does this information compare to the whole Microsoft catalog? So we give you that flexibility to be able to toggle back and forth. And then, of course, you can filter the data. What I've learned in spending time in this particular area is every organization has a different process and a different way of slicing and dicing the data, whether they used a la carte licensing, if they use group-based licensing, do they use a custom attribute? There's a lot here in terms of what of how the way people license. I think the key thing that I want to leave the audience with is this is a headache that we can take away from you. It is something that we are investing in heavily. And if it's something that you're dealing with, please contact us because we're looking for new use cases. And we really just want to get this problem out of IT's hand and really just give it to procurement. They have other tools like Flexera and Snow, but they don't go as deep in the 365 as we do. And so therefore the pressure on the IT admin is still there. So I knew that was a mouthful. I went really, really fast. Licensing you could spend an hour on, but I think the key thing to remember is inactive licenses, duplicate licenses, being able to forecast, being able to really save your organization money, and most importantly, we want to save you time.
Yeah, and what you see is that with an enterprise agreement, you can only true up or true down every year. So you might always have some licenses that are that you don't need, but that will just go away at the end of the renewal period.
Absolutely, there's two different lenses. There's the day-to-day management of licenses and your annual true up, and then there's obviously the EA. But it's a problem we all can agree IT pros don't want to deal with, and so we're here to help. Let's move into our third myth. This is a fun one because it's very controversial. Tends to be controversial on Twitter with some MVPs, which is, do you need backups? Let's talk about that.
I don't know how controversial we are anymore, but let's get into it. First of all, before we get too deep, I want to remind again, last push, let's try to get the questions in before the end of the presentation. This is our final myth, so last call for questions. But this is a conversation I've been having really heavily since we've pushed out the 365 product, and it seems like a strange conversation to be having just because of when we were on-prem and we were looking at a server and we were backing up that database, and you ask the administrator, say, hey, where did you back up that database to? And they said to the same server, to that drive right there. And you guys you make eye contact and there's a like solemn silence between both of you and like, wait a second, we have a single point of failure is the realization that you have. And that single point of failure is the same concept that is now happening up in the 365 environment. When you have a single point of entry of an administrative account, being able to alter that same data from the 365 environment as it is to put that data into the 365 environment. You're no more protected by putting it into, say, a first and second stage storage. I write a blog post on how you rip it all out in 2 lines of PowerShell because I do a lot of demoing in my environment and I like to clean out the demo environment to do multiple styles of testing, and I don't want to leave a bunch of junk behind in my environment. Beyond that, There is a shared responsibility model behind Microsoft. Microsoft developed the shared responsibility model when they started offering cloud offerings, and it's a service level agreement for all of their as a service offerings, from platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and software as a service. Each of them step down for what the responsibility breakdown is between the customer and the relationship, and Microsoft and the relationship when it comes to each of their offerings. When it comes to software as a service, they cover, say, the infrastructure, they cover the networking security, they cover the platform upgrades and all of that fun jazz. And they cover all the way up until making sure they have the platform online for you to be able to log in. So they're responsible for the log on for the access server to be available. Now, the accounts to log on to those servers and the configurations of the security on those accounts to log on to the server are your responsibility. If someone was to hack their network and come in through the side door, they're responsible for any type of corruption. But if someone comes to that front door from a compromised account, anything that comes to the front door that alters that data is ultimately on the customer's responsibility, and Microsoft has no liability in that kind of conversation. And I think, Sanders, you've seen some of these types of incidents out there as well, where customers have been like, yeah, it's fine, I've got this protection, and then they realize, Microsoft, why aren't you helping me?
Oh yeah, definitely. So one of the things that Microsoft tells you is that all the data that you put into Microsoft 365 is stored in at least 9 physical locations. And it doesn't help.
Replicated real time.
Yeah, yeah, you have 9 replicas. Yeah, so if some disgruntled admin is going to disable or going to delete that, then it will be gone eventually. And if you don't get that into a backup, or if you don't see that soon enough, then it will be definitely gone unless you have a backup. And the same is for exit scenarios where you see things. But the moment where it got scary for me with a lot of customers was when we learned that there's wiper software for Microsoft 365 these days, and one of the first things that they do in SharePoint is they set uh, the versioning, which is by default on 5,000 previous versions. They set it to 1, and then they wipe it twice, or uh, they encrypt the data twice. So even though you might think that you would have 5,000 previous versions, you only have 1, which is also encrypted.
So it's
So
become huge.
yeah, attackers are really learning about how to, well, manage your Microsoft 365 more effectively than you might do it as an IT pro.
So I think the scariest part about the versioning attack is actually not just about, yes, they found a new way, but you don't need a privileged account to do that one. That is an everyday user account, can go into your own like your own SharePoint site, your own OneDrive account, and technically you can set the micro versions down to a minimum of 500. A micro change is changing a letter in a file, changing a word in a file. Do you know how fast a computer can alter all of those different versions of a file? It's incredibly how fast you could do that. And then over a weekend, all of the data in your directory is gone. And they've compromised one person over an entire weekend. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes if it's the C-level and you just want to do reputation damage, that's enough. And they're going to find a way in the end. And we have a solution for that. We have Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. That is my specialty product we have here. And I'll show my screen here. Taking back control. I'm gonna rip it away from you, Jay. Show my screen.
Here we go.
There we go. Good? Can you see it? Perfect. So this is Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. It's fairly straightforward to configure. One of the things that do set us apart from some of our competition is we don't use just username and password. We also use the new Teams API. We allow for modern authentication with app-only enterprise application authentication using certificate and app IT authentication. The only reason I have a username in here is for the deployment of the application for that initial authentication. So I don't actually even use the username for that authentication. If I needed to deploy a new permission, I would then use that username to log into my organization to assign that new permission with whatever multi-factor authentication I had. So that bypasses all of that necessity or the possible compromising of that accounts and that conversation. Plus, I'm not assigning administrative account needs. I can microly assign API permissions, like the specific read and writes that are needed, which are a lot more granular than like your global admin accounts. They've gotten a lot better with administrative billing accounts and all of the other granular admin accounts, but they're not quite there for what you can do for the other administrative accounts yet. We also have a very dynamic way that you can add and configure users, which is going to be either users, groups, sites, teams, and your entire organization. Each of these business units that you're able to add in, like my dummies accounts that I add in, I can scope down to having just maybe their mailbox, the archive, the sites, the groups within those if that's all I want. And I can make as many or as little jobs along with that. I can send these all off to a object storage for a short-term retention and then even pour off to a longer-term retention with a backup copy if needed. The backup can be done as often or as little during the day as you want, and even a termination window if you need to have an on-prem like block off during, say, business hours, which some organizations do, especially schools and people that still have that work life in office. Some do, some don't, or some have a VPN that they do have to access and they need to have it available during certain business hours and don't need that traffic. All right. And we're going to take a look at the restore process through the portal because I feel like this is the thing that really stands out. The portal does not need access. You don't need access to the backup server. You don't need to have Microsoft elevated permissions. You don't need to have elevated permissions on the server. What you do is you configure groups or accounts from the console to have permissions to the server. They'll use their own Microsoft logins on an address. The login verifies with an Azure enterprise application, so they have no direct contact to the server. The Azure application authenticates and facilitates the authentication back to the server for them and the token access and what they have a scope to access from the backup. So there's no in between for what they're going to be able to do. And they immediately get access to their OneDrive, their SharePoint, and their Exchange. Our next version is going to allow them to go to specific points in time. So if they deleted something a year ago and they need to pull back maybe a file, a contact, a sticky note that they know they wrote on, and now they need to get it back for whatever reason, they don't need to contact you. Additionally, you can also assign a group of restore operators. Now, these restore operators, I've created this nifty group that I've named Restore Service Desk. Now, these are what I call my restore warriors. These are people that are slightly better in my organization than some of the other people in my organization that I know can take over some of the restore processes when I know I just don't have time. So if they come in, they're going to be on top of it because I know they kind of want to move over to my department and they want to prove that they can take SLAs on tickets and get stuff done faster. And this is a way for them to prove themselves. So they can come in here and start restore processes for, say, raw and replica. They won't be able to export any users' data, but they can orchestrate high-level searches for titles of emails. So if they come into inbox and they get a title of an email that needs to be restored, say the education email from a certain date, they can restore back only to the original user's email box without any Exchange administrative permissions, SharePoint administrative permissions, or OneDrive administrative permissions in Microsoft. And that's all they need to do. And now you've done restore processes without all of that extra things you really don't want to give away most of the time. And that's what I had for here. And I got to give the control back over here to Jay.
That was super cool.
Quick, easy, and to the point. And again, I think we've answered all the questions. We just have a couple more wrap-up slides here. Quick, easy demo.
I think you're muted.
You are muted.
That was really impressive, Karinne, how easy it is to be able to do the restores. Remember my old IT days, backing up servers, that was a pain to do a restore and actually get everything configured correctly. It had to be exchange aware, just point and click. Very cool. Sandra, you were saying something?
Yeah, I did see one question come in. It's about an admin that uses the sparkly glitter theme for Outlook web app. You
I'm
might
sorry,
know
what?
that. The sparkly glitter theme in Outlook web app that you can choose. And he was asking if there's themes for the self-service restore portal. So he can make that matching and do it like that.
I'll be sure to put in a feature request. By any chance, is this you, Sanders?
No, it's not me. Nope.
Okay.
But I do use the sparkly glitter theme wherever I can. And it's not available at all the places, but if I can get it in the self-service restore, yeah, I will definitely enable that.
I'm sure they make an app for that. It is just HTML.
Yeah, so you might just do it with a, yeah, you could.
Yeah, there should
With a
be an
plugin.
app because you
Yeah.
have apps that will change the contrast.
Should be easy enough.
Excuse me while I go waste the rest of my afternoon. Trying out apps. I think we actually did get a question. Oh no, we got no question. But we did get a thank you for the information, and they enjoyed the things that we said, and we appreciate you joining us. Back at you.
Yeah, cool, Ian. Thank you. I do see another question here. Let's see. It's someone who's using SQL Server Express with Azure AD Connect, and they're running into that 10 gig limit. Are you aware of that, Jay? The 10 gig limit in SQL Server Express? You can't go beyond that. Is that something that ENow software monitors?
Absolutely.
For the Azure? Well, show me then.
So instead of showing you, I'll talk a little bit about it. So I focused the presentation on synthetic transactions. Any monitoring system worth its salt has to cover the operating system. So obviously we would be able to catch that pretty early because we're monitoring the database size and we're monitoring the SQL server that it sits on. I think the challenge is because the IT person's role has changed to just not babysitting servers and watching servers. Now it's user education, it's tracking adoption. The chance of something biting you actually increases, something simple like disk-based monitoring. So having that single pane of glass, one of our customers, the fast food restaurant Wendy's, had said that our software was like a babysitter. He comes in the morning, everything's green, I'm good, I can go on my day. So yeah, we give you that peace of mind. And we obviously monitor Azure AD Connect, ADFS, the Azure authentication service, and we're always looking to expand. We have a product management portal that we expose to our clients. That's where a lot of license optimization ideas have come from, where people can just type in, hey, this is causing me pain. Can you guys solve this problem for us? And I think that is a very important takeaway, regardless of what solution you're looking for. You want to pick a partner that truly is a partner that is watching what Microsoft is doing and is flexible and has a quick development cycle. And Karinne, I know you guys are, you have the same mindset where you're adopting the new Teams API. It's about change and how quickly can we adapt to the changing needs of the IT professional.
That is 100% correct. And the change isn't just about what's new and shiny, but change means security. If you're behind, you're leaving yourself open to security vulnerabilities. And the new team's API is also a protected API. It's introducing a security level that is going to bring a level of security to the platform, the API transactions that it just didn't have before.
But it is kind of controversial, right? The new API.
Oh, you mean the meter part?
Almost as controversial as backing up or not in Microsoft 365, I guess. Yeah, it is going to cost.
She's not taking the bait on that
She's
one.
not saying anything. Yeah.
I'm waiting. I was letting you clarify.
All right.
So I am actually a big proponent. I will be the first one to say not everyone needs a backup Microsoft 365, but if you hear the reasons why you need to protect your data or the things that you might lose if you don't, there's a fair chance that you probably do. It's whether or not you're willing to risk that type of data. How important is that intellectual property to you? If the answer that data is important, that you have business critical data on that application, and there's a potential for that type of data loss, then maybe you might want to consider doing that. I was reading a report that came out, and the difference between 2020 and 2022 was a 50% jump, which was 6% to 9% of a change in senior leadership when they had an attack on Microsoft 365 data. So maybe that almost 10% of leadership had a shift when there was an attack.
Yeah, I think it's all. I think it's also about personal experience, because I've never been asked to restore any Teams chat, and I've been in the business for Microsoft 365 backup and restore for quite some time now. But I did hear the story about one of the big four organizations that had to restore 144,000 chats and actually lost them because they didn't know how to restore, and they just funked up a retention setting.
Do you drive a car? No, do you drive a car? Do you have insurance on your car?
Yes.
Do you wear a seatbelt? When's the last time you've been in an accident? But do you know someone that's been in an accident?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
You and out so that you didn't have to admit if you were in an accident. Pretty clever. Yeah, but I think the argument.
Pause.
I think the argument can also be made for monitoring.
Yeah.
Because the answer is it depends. Some people say, why do I care if it's a Microsoft problem if they're going to fix it? Well, do you care about IT perception? What if you're wrong? What if it's something on your side? So I think with anything, the answer is it depends upon your organizational requirements, your users' requirements. And this is why we have these discussions, right? Is to build awareness. And hopefully for the audience, we broaden your perspective and give you some things to think about. Because I think that was our goal in having this discussion. I've certainly enjoyed chatting with both of you. We've talked about doing some more of these. Any closing thoughts?
This was fun. Let's do it again soon.
I would be ecstatic to do this again. I enjoyed the conversation with both of you.
Great. And I guess we'll see some of the audience at Ignite, some of the audience at EDUCON. So look for Beam and ENow. We're going to be at different events. We'd love to chat with you about these topics and how we can serve you. Thank you guys for attending today's webinar. Cheers.
Thank you.